Hello, welcome to another edition of Proselytize or Apostatize. I'm your host, David Paulman, and I'm here with my co-host, David Russell. How are you doing, David?
Hey man, what's up, buddy?
Doing well. How are you surviving the coronavirus, man?
Well, just like you, I now have a piece of paper that I put in my car to allow me to go to work. But the good news is I'm working 2 days a week and getting paid for 40 hours. So we have enough guys that they rotate the stuff in, and so everybody keeps their job. Our place is fully funded, and they're paying us. So I'm happy for that.
Nice,
How
nice.
about you,
All right.
man?
I mean, I'm holding up. I'm one of those essential workers in the grocery store, so we're getting, and I'm in New York where it's bad, so we get swarmed. But we're making it. Nobody, not me or my family, sick, so
That's
it's
good,
going good.
man. That's good.
So we were
So what?
supposed to have a bit of a debate today, but looks like this is our atheist was scared of our theist and didn't want to show up.
Oh, I wouldn't say that, man. David's pretty not scared of talking to anybody, and he's a great host.
I was kidding there, but no, we
I
do
know.
have Evan Minton on with us today. And he hopefully we're going to try to be getting him to debate David Johnson from Skeptics and Seekers here on whether or not the universe had a beginning. But Evan, you're from cerebralfaith.net. You're the blogger over there, and you host your Cerebral Faith podcast. I'll say it right. That's a bit of a tongue twister there when you're saying it fast. And then you're the author of My Redeemer Lives and The Case for the One True God. And you're working on a book on hell, right? That's still on the table?
Right. I'm still having it proofread. It's kind of coming along more slowly than I would like, but I'm hoping to get it out soon. It's pretty much a revision of my previous hell book, A Hellacious Doctrine. I was a traditionalist back then. I'm a conditionalist now, and so I have like 3 whole chapters dedicated to the eternal torment and the annihilation debate, and I also go into more detail into the arguments for God's existence in the book. So it's a much thicker version and a, you know, revised edition of A Hellacious Doctrine with some recantations.
Well, good, good. All right, so Russell, we're talking about arguments from cosmology today, right? Cosmological arguments for the existence of God.
Absolutely. One of the biggest questions one of the biggest things that I like to go over. I mean, we had a debate last year. We interviewed Hugh Ross this year, and I always like to keep up, like in an apologetics, segment to talk about the cosmological argument because I think it's such a good argument. And one of the questions that I got for you, Evan, is where are we at with cosmological arguments? Are they still great arguments to you?
Well, I think they are. I use them all the time in debating atheists, whether that be um, formally or informally in a broadcasted kind of podcast YouTube thing, or just like over Facebook threads or forums. And I've actually debated that. I've actually used this in witnessing to atheists and skeptics for years, and I'm not running into any. I mean, none of them have convinced me that the Kalam cosmological argument or the contingency argument are bad arguments. I can't find any. And when I listen to people who like William Lane Craig debate atheist philosophers on the Kalam, and even cosmologists like Sean Carroll or Lawrence Krauss, they don't give very good responses to Craig. So I
So
think they're good. Now,
So
where are we?
so
Where
what
are we
about
at today?
yeah.
Now, I think there. I don't know if any of you. Oh, you probably have. He's kind of internet famous now. Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy.
Mhm.
He kind of got this argument from Jonathan Ratz. I hope I said his name right. They've formulated an argument that is pretty much a cosmological argument. I consider it a cosmological argument, and I'm hoping to have Jones on my own podcast later this year to talk about it. It's called the digital physics argument for God's existence, and it's trying to argue that the the existence of the universe is kind of like a hologram being projected from underlying information, kind of like the real universe is a film projector, and what we experience is like a projection on the wall, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I've heard it.
And that points to a mind that is kind of, a mind is projecting it, because it's and Inspiring Philosophy, he's got a whole video on this on YouTube. You could go check it out. People, it kind of, I think it entails a view called idealism. So if you're not an idealist, you might not like that version, but that's a new cosmological argument that I had not heard before until recently, and I haven't heard, other than Jones and Rats, I haven't heard anybody else use that. So and it's using the most current developments in physics and cosmology. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so what makes a cosmological argument good? I mean, let's get into that. Let's explore what makes a like, for example, let's start with the Leibniz contingency argument. What makes that a good argument?
Well, I mean, what makes any argument good? True. It has to be formally valid. That is to say, it's the conclusion has to follow from the premises by the laws of logic, and it has to have true premises, and the premises, we got to have good reasons to believe that they exist. Now, the contingency argument for God's existence, does it meet those three criteria for what it makes a good argument? I think it does. The premises of the argument are: 1, everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. 2, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. 3, the universe exists. 4, therefore the universe has an explanation of its existence. 5, therefore the explanation of the universe is God. And this is William Lane Craig's version. There are other versions, but this is the one I'm most familiar with. Other ways of cashing it out, but now the conclusion does follow steps. Premise 4 logically follows from premises 1 and 3, and 5 follows from 2 and 4. So, do you want me to go into the evidence for those premises now?
Yeah. Let's explore it a little bit, because I'm going to section this up, because I do want to talk to you a little bit about Craig and Carroll's debate. I think it's happened like 6-7 years ago now, but yeah, let's do that, and then we'll get into more of the Kalam kind of. Does the we won't talk exactly, but I want to see what you think about why the universe had a beginning. Why do you think it had a beginning? And we won't go too much into the debate portion. We'll save that for the debate, but I do want to touch base on it, and we can talk.
All right. So premise 1, everything
go ahead.
Exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. This premise asserts that anything that exists, there are two types of things, two types of explanations that could account for why it exists. Either it exists because something else outside of it and existed before it caused it to come into being, like your parents caused you to come into being, or it just exists out of a necessity of its own nature. It has to exist, and it cannot not exist. Its non-existence is impossible. Many Platonists think that abstract objects like numbers have this kind of existence. If they exist necessarily. The number 1 cannot fail to exist. So the issue. So now that we know what kind of explanations we're talking about here, is the premise true? I think it is. I think it's actually self-evident. And William Lane Craig, in his writings on the subject, he gives this illustration. He says to imagine that you are walking through the forest with a friend and you find a ball lying on the ground. And you just wonder, why is the ball there? If your friend said to you, don't worry about it, the ball just exists inexplicably, you would either think that he was crazy or he was just joking around. You would never take seriously the claim that the ball just existed there for no reason, with no explanation why it existed or how it came to be there. Whatever it is we think about, whether it be cars, trucks, tables, peoples, houses, balloons, PlayStations 4s, we all know there has to be some explanation for their existence. Nothing exists for no reason. And even little children know this. Why else would they ask mom and dad, where do babies come from? They know that they have an explanation for their existence. They don't exist inexplicably.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so let me jump in here real quick because we got David Paulman over here who is really big in the philosophy too. David, why are self-evident arguments, stuff that's self-evident? Why is that good evidence? Why would you consider it good evidence?
Well, it's not even evidence per se. Things that are self-evident in the philosophical sense of
Yeah.
it, right, are things that literally can't be false. So it's not something that like I'm just presenting, something to raise the probability of the truth of something. When we claim something is self-evident, philosophically, this is something that actually can't be false, and so it kind of gets, at least in my view, and I know me and Evan just had a little bit of disagreement over Cartesianism the other day, but in my view, at least, things that are self-evident, things that cannot be false, these get the highest level of epistemological priority, I guess, if you want to say. These are sort of what get the start of. So if something can't be false, that's the best kind of proof that you can have for the truth of anything.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's move to the second. Are you still on the first premise, or do you want to move to the second?
Well, there is a very
go ahead.
There is a very obvious objection to the first premise that is bound to come up whenever you give the argument to any atheist, and I think I'd like to respond to that before we get to premise 2.
Sure, go ahead.
That the explanation there is, if everything has to have an explanation for its existence, then that means that God has to have an explanation for his existence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the atheist, obviously he doesn't believe in God, but he's saying, hey, you Christians, this is an unacceptable answer to you. So you probably, just to say that God has to have an explanation of his existence, God's the uncreated creator. He's the uncaused cause. He from everlasting to everlasting. So it's kind of try to throw it back in the Christian theist's face and say, no, you shouldn't use this argument.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that we would not deny that God has an explanation for his existence. The first premise says everything has two kinds of explanations: an external cause, or it exists of a necessity of its own nature. We would say, no, God doesn't have an external cause as his explanation. The explanation for God's existence is that he's a necessary being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's always an initial cause that gives way to all the effects, right? That there's always that starting point.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense. But on the second premise, why does it have to be God? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, at first, when you first look at the syllogism, it looks like a huge logical leap, but it actually makes sense when you think about it. In order to have caused the universe to come into being, and this, of course, assumes that the universe is the explanation for the existence of the universe is that it doesn't exist by necessity of its own nature, and there are some good reasons for that. One of the if the universe had a beginning to its existence, like as Big Bang cosmology shows, obviously it couldn't be a necessary being. Necessary things cannot not exist at any time. They always existed and they always will exist. But also, William Lane Craig is like given a good illustration to say, the universe could have been different. Like we could have had a different arrangement of quarks or strings. The universe could have been made out of something completely different. And if string theorists are right, then it is. It's not quarks. it's strings. That string theory. Scientists are kind of giving up on that now, but that's besides the point. The point is that theoretically, we could have had a different universe, and thus the universe that actually exists isn't necessary. So even if you don't presuppose that the universe had a beginning, and opponents of the contingency argument, they don't usually go down this road anyway, usually for that reason, the Big Bang. But so if the explanation for the universe's existence isn't that it exists by a necessity of its own nature, it had to have an external cause. Well, what kind of cause could the universe have? It had to be a cause beyond it had to be a cause beyond space and time, beyond all matter, energy, space, and time, and therefore be immaterial. Well, why must it be? That means it's spaceless. If it's the cause of all space, it cannot be inside of space. It cannot be inside of something that doesn't exist yet. Just as the builder of the house cannot be inside of the house until it makes the house. It must be immaterial for the same reason that it's spaceless. Material objects cannot exist unless space exists. Material objects occupy spatial dimensions. If there are no space, if there are no spatial dimensions, matter cannot exist. This means that because the cause is non-material, it's therefore, non-spatial, therefore it's non-material. And whatever has the ability to either bring the universe into being or sustain it had to be enormously powerful. It also must be a personal being. Why? Because we've just established that it's immaterial. And the immateriality of the cause entails its personality. There are two types of things recognized by philosophers to be immaterial, either abstract objects, such as numbers, sets, or other mathematical entities, or unembodied minds. But abstract objects can't cause any effects. That's part of what it means to be abstract. The number 3 isn't going to be producing any effects anytime soon. Given that abstract objects are causally impotent, it follows that an unembodied mind is the cause of the universe's beginning. Now, a spaceless, immaterial, powerful, unembodied mind sounds a lot like God to me. Now, if the skeptic, if he doesn't like the word God in the premise, he can just, as William Lane Craig says in his animated video on the contingency argument, he could just take the name God out and just put the spaceless, immaterial, powerful, timeless, personal creator.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say, so the atheist can, like, say, just take out God and put that in, but I mean, does that give us, like, the justification to say it is God, it is a creator? Because, like, even we're kind of using, like, time here, saying, like, before creation comes, something had to create it, and we're saying before time, there's basically time. We're using, like, I guess, time language to usher in a creation narrative of some sort. You kind of understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to. Yeah. I'm having some hard time putting it together. But
with the God name thing, that's just semantics. In fact, I think Craig, at least when I say that same thing, I'm just being cheeky. I'm like, hey, if you don't like the name, like, if you don't like the name dog, if you don't like to call this animal a dog, let's just call it a 4-legged furry canine. I mean, it's still the same thing. It's just as Shakespeare said, a rose by any other name is just as sweet. I mean, any kind of worldview that says that there's an unembodied, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful creator, that's deism at least, but it's certainly not atheism.
Yeah. So let's move on here. Dave, do you have any questions on this so far?
Well, I was going to ask him.
I forgot about the time thing. Yeah, we often use before the creation, and that's not. That does throw people off. People are like, wait, that's incoherent, because especially if you're thinking Big Bang cosmology. Oh, that's the beginning of time. But I think it's helpful if two things. If we realize that we're using, like, I like to think of it as like logical priority. It's like God did not do something before he created the universe. God's act, his decision to create the universe, is simultaneous with the universe's coming into being. And I think it's better if we speak of, like, God is the logical cause of the universe rather than the temporal cause, rather than existing temporally prior to boom.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I was gonna have you highlight on that because that's a big one people bring up a lot. But David, go ahead. You said you had a question or two?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to ask Evan, well, what do you think is probably the best or strongest objection to cosmological arguments, either particularly or generally?
I think probably the strongest against well, any form of cosmological argument, but especially the Kalam, is I think the mother universe explanation that says that our universe is just one baby that was spawned in a much wider mother multiverse, and there's all these different baby universes being spawned from this mother. Now, I think that's the best objection, but I don't think it works. And here's why.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it, at any point within this mother universe vacuum, there is a non-zero probability for a universe to be formed at that point in the mother vacuum. Now, if the atheist is saying this mother, even though our universe began, if the mother universe always existed, I mean, it's eternally past. So what that means is there was an infinite amount of time for a baby universe to form at every single point within the mother universe. Any mathematician will tell you this. I once heard a mathematician joke that if you let your dryer run for an infinite amount of time, it would eventually fold your laundry for you, because there's a non-zero probability of that happening. So if the mother universe is eternally existent, it had an infinite amount of time to spawn bubbles. Now here's what follows from that. There would be the mother universe would be so filled with so many bubbles, so many baby universes, that all of the universe would collide, they would cobble together and form what appears to be an infinitely large, infinitely old universe, which contradicts the observations that we live in a universe of finite size and age. Now, if the atheist wants to get out of that and say, well, okay, well, maybe the mother universe is expanding, then the Borguth-Vilenkin theorem applies to the mother universe, and the Borguth-Vilenkin theorem says that any universe which has been expanding on average within its past had to have a beginning. If the mother universe is getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it gets older and older and older, then if you rewind the clock, backward extrapolation, eventually the mother universe shrinks down to a singularity beginning, and you haven't avoided the problem of an ultimate first cause. Now, if they want to postulate a grandmother universe, you just run into the same problems. And so the way I see it, they just keep kick God farther and farther upstairs.
Yeah, they do it a lot. But what do you think about, I mean, even Guth doesn't really hold to the BG theorem anymore. So he thinks that space was eternal, especially if you have a reversed error of time. So what do you say to those things?
Well,
I mean, he's a proponent of eternal inflation.
Well, I still think that if the universe is getting bigger and bigger as it gets older and older, then the theorem aside, it had to have been smaller and smaller in the past. In fact, this is what led astronomers in the early 1900s to conclude that our universe had a beginning, because they realized the galaxy, it was expanding. And if Lee Strobel, in his film The Case for a Creator, he illustrates it like this. He has a film projector, and it's showing all of these dots moving farther and farther away as the as the film runs forward. And then the pause button on the film projector is pushed and the rewind button is pushed. And as the film runs backwards, all of those dots get closer and closer together until they're all conjoined together like that.
Yeah, but wouldn't that negate that if there's a reversal in the arrow of time? Are you familiar with Aguirre-Grayton's model of the universe and the Carroll Chin model?
No, I haven't. I haven't been studying cosmology for a while. I've had my head in ancient Near Eastern biblical studies for the past year and a half. So
yeah, so basically they propose a reversal of the arrow of time. The problem is, and this is what I think Wall, he talks about this too. Who Craig brings up, Aaron Wall. He's a Christian cosmologist, and he proposed a paper, or a bunch of papers where him and Carroll go back and forth, and there's some his stuff on did the universe actually have a beginning, and he still posits that it looks so because the only way it couldn't is if there's a reversal of the arrow of time, but you're still having problems with the entropy argument. Whereas they still need a entropic beginning. They still haven't been able to explain that. And that's kind of like where he comes to. But there's a lot of speculation out there, and anything before that 1/1000th of a second is speculative, right? So I mean that's what we're kind of going on. So yeah, it's pretty neat, but I thought I'd just bring it up to see where you were at on it.
Yeah, that's also I noticed that a lot of atheists. I should probably look into that. But I've been studying. I wrote a whole paper series on the primeval history of Genesis 1 to 11, and so I've been studying ancient Near Eastern creation myths, and I've been looking into John Walton's and Michael Heiser's and John Selhammer's and Ben Stanhope's writings and all that. So, that's new to me. I'm just going, but it doesn't just based on what I heard, it doesn't sound persuasive, but I'd have to look into that. But there's a couple of philosophical arguments for the universe's beginning. There's the impossibility of traversing an infinite number of moments, the impossibility of and I don't think we have time to get into those today, but
this is just a kind of idea of like where you see the state of cosmological arguments today, and and also where David sees them as well, and where I see them. I personally think they're probably some of the strongest arguments that we have in our arsenal when it comes to stuff like that.
What you said there about that whole reversal of time thing, that would only affect the Kalam. That would not affect the contingency argument at all. All that you need for the contingency argument to work is that the universe not be logically necessary in its being. I mean, if the universe could have failed to exist, if it didn't have to exist, then the argument goes through.
Yeah, absolutely. David, you got any questions yourself?
No, I think you covered all the bases pretty well.
Yeah, there's one thing, and we'll kind of conclude it with this. You're talking about the Carroll Craig argument there. So what did you think about that? I thought that was Craig's worst performance. And I still, and and maybe you can explain this to me, because this is what I'm really into astrophysics. It's one of my my main studies, and it's amazing to me. These arguments are really amazing to me. They break my brain, and the biggest one that breaks my brain the most is Boltzmanns' brains. Do you have any word on that?
Oh yeah, the Boltzmann brains argument. I use that one all the time when I'm using the fine-tuning argument, because it really shows the absurdity of postulating an infinite number of universes to account for the fine tuning. Because, like I said earlier, if you've got an infinite number of chances, if there's a non-zero probability of something occurring, it will occur. There will be a universe somewhere where the dryer folds your laundry.
Yeah.
And so you can have all sorts of crazy things if you've got an infinite. Yeah, it accounts for the fine tuning. But you could have universes where John Kinson, he's a physicist. He wrote a book called God in the Multiverse. He said that there could be a universe somewhere where every time someone casts a magic spell, the molecules and the particles in the universe behave in just such a way that it looks like the spell was successful every single time. So you could have, like, Hogwarts. It's not really magic. It's just molecules happening to do things by chance. And so what Craig points out, what he says is that there could be a whole bunch of universes, the invasion of the Boltzmann brains, where out of quantum fluctuations, a single brain comes into being and observes an orderly universe. Maybe it's an illusion of the brain or something, I don't know. But then the brain goes out of existence. And so you could be, for all you know, you could be a Boltzmann brain. You just spontaneously fluctuated into being, and you think you have false memories of the past, and you're going to go out of existence in a few minutes. It's possible. It destroys the grounds for rationality. It's kind of like Descartes' demon.
So what do you think in regards to Craig and Carroll's debate? What did you take away from it? Did you ever see the whole symposium? Because that debate was just part of a symposium. It was actually really interesting.
I didn't see the whole symposium, and it has been a long time since I saw it.
Yeah.
So I can't say if I thought it was Craig's worst performance. I'd have to go watch it again and because it's really not fresh in my mind what the two said.
Yeah, Carroll, I think it was probably his worst because Carroll was kind of disingenuous when he was bringing up some of the, like, when he brought up the QET model, and that actually is based on if the universe had 0 point energy versus a very small percentage of energy, I believe. I can't remember right off the top of my head. It's been a while since I've looked into it too, but yeah, as far as like him slipping stuff in there like that and then going off, the rails at it, I think that was probably that's why I would say it. But so on your opinion, why does the universe have a beginning? Or do you think the universe does have a beginning?
I think it does. I think and I'm going to give 4 arguments. I'm not going to unpack those arguments in this podcast because, for one thing, I don't want to, we don't have the time. Another thing, I don't want to give too much away to my opponent who might hear this later. But Big Bang cosmology and all of the evidence for it, the Big Bang, the second law of thermodynamics, the argument that an actually infinite number of things cannot exist, and that includes past moments, and the argument that you cannot traverse an infinite number of past moments. Therefore, today couldn't have arrived, but obviously today has arrived. Therefore, we couldn't have endured an infinite number of past events. Mm-hmm. And like I said, if you want to define universe as all of physical reality, and even if we were to concede that the whole mother universe scenario, you still get back to a beginning. And even if you posit a grandmother and a great grandmother and a great great grandmother universe scenario, you still get back to a beginning. And because of that infinite regress problem, you can't traverse it. You can't just keep positing higher levels of grandmother universes. You've got to come to a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, et cetera, creator at some point in the regress.
So no quantum tunneling then, like Alexander Vilenkin proposes.
No, the problem with that is that it's not. For one thing, the quantum vacuum is a part of our universe, and for another thing, it's not really nothing. Like it's like Lawrence Krauss says. He calls it nothing. No, it's got a physical structure. It's a sea of roaring, violent energy. That's just, you misrepresent science if you call the quantum vacuum nothing.
Okay. So so one thing is so and this is the last part. So you're saying overall that there's a lot of good evidence for the beginning of the universe.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's pretty much all the questions I have for the day, David. You got anything else, buddy?
What's the evidence against the universe having a beginning?
Are you asking me or him?
I'm asking Evan.
There isn't really. Not that I could think of. In fact, I can't remember who said, he was an atheist cosmologist. I can't remember who said it, but I remember him saying that all the evidence we have points to the universe having a beginning. That's a pretty strong claim. I wish I could point you to who said it, but
I think I've read the quote. I'm pretty sure it was Lincoln. He's agnostic, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah.
Lincoln
has some pretty wild ideas too. So go ahead, David. You said you wanted to know arguments against it.
Yeah, well, I was just
to give
getting Evan to say there aren't
ammo.
any.
You want some ammo for our atheist contender here when we get on? Well, like I said, the reversal of the error time is a big one. And that's not something we can just glance over. I don't think the Wire-Graton model holds up very well as far as not being able to define a cosmic beginning to energy, so the entropic issues that go on there. But like, I hold to a Penrose plus model. So when I talk about the Penrose plus model, it's basically Penrose's theory plus the thermodynamics and it allows for the universe to have a beginning. But any argument that's against it, you have the Penrose is like very known for talking about the I guess, oh man, I can't even remember the name of it, but he was talking about it with Craig this last year in September on Unbelievable. And he talks about, like, there's some new stuff that supports his theory about, the universe basically getting to a point and then restarting. So so it's not an osculating model, but it's, man, I can't even think of the name. But there's that. There's also the Sean Carroll and the Carroll Chin model, and the Wire-Graton. Those three are the only ones that I think that put up a good front. But you got to remember, anything down to a billionth of a second right before the Big Bang, or what we call the singularity and the Big Bang and all that, anything in that 1 billionth of a second is speculative. So
yeah, I don't really, the fact that we don't know what the universe is like during that billionth of a second, I just don't know how you can infer that the universe is eternal from that.
Yeah, I don't either.
It'd be like that's. In fact, I responded to Rationality Rules making his Big Bang Debunked video. I have a blog post up on cerebralfaith.net, and I use the analogy of like someone going up to someone hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before a whole lot was known about embryology, and saying that because people don't know what happens during the earliest stages of pregnancy, like that billionth of a second of the pregnancy, therefore human beings could be eternal. It just doesn't make any sense. If the belly gets smaller and smaller as you reverse the arrow of time, the fetus had a beginning.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think you run into a lot of, like, the big crunch, as they call it, as far as energy goes. Even if you try to take it back, and I think Carroll was the one that says that we just don't know what the laws of nature are when they get to something very far or very small, and regular physics don't work and general relativity doesn't work and stuff like that. But I still think the most natural conclusion is, okay, so you're saying it doesn't have a beginning because you don't know, this and that, and then I hear him on Closer to Truth saying, hey, I don't want the universe to have a beginning because that's the end of science. And you're like, okay, that's where that bias is coming in, you know? But there's a lot to it. And, you know, I think there are some arguments to take into consideration, as Aaron Wall says, but I still think that as Hugh Ross told us, it's pretty evident that it had a beginning. And it's, you know, you can know it had a beginning as well as I know that my son exists. He said something along those lines, right, David?
Yes, he did. And
All
it's
right.
been, you know, a good chat, gentlemen.
Yep.
It's, you know, we've seen the case for it. Unfortunately, that we weren't able to have the debate today, but we are going to try to have that, you know, get that set up as soon as we can here. And so we'll get to really test the strength of these arguments out against an atheist who will, you know, actually be challenging. So, and yes, we'll try to connect you, Evan, with some of David's material. Russell, I'm sure you can send that off to him. Be sure to check out Evan's website, Cerebral Faith. We'll have the link for that in the description. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
All right.